Let me welcome everyone to our discussion with Marino Córdoba about the situation for Afro-Colombians in Colombia. The title of his talk is From Internal Displacement to Inclusive Democracy, the Afro-Colombian Experience. And we're delighted to have Marino with us, and we're also delighted to have as a discussant Zakiya Carr-Johnson, who is Director of the Race, Ethnicity, and Social Inclusion Unit at the U.S. Department of State. As many people here know, but let me reiterate that, the Reagan-Fussell Democracy Fellows Program hosts some of the world's most dedicated democracy activists, scholars, and journalists who conduct independent research and pursue projects here at NED. It was founded in 2001, and the program has hosted more than 200 fellows from over 80 countries since 2001. Within this remarkable group, our speaker today stands out for his powerful commitment to democracy in Colombia. And since the 1980s, conflict involving the Colombian military, left and right-wing paramilitary groups has forced tens of thousands of Colombians, resulting in one of the largest internally displaced populations in the world. Disproportionately affected by the conflict have been Colombia's Afro-descendant communities, most of whom live along the country's western coast. As the Colombian government and FARC rebels gather now to discuss how to bring this conflict to an end, the leaders must take steps to reintegrate displaced civilians within their traditional communities and safeguard their civil and socioeconomic rights. In his presentation, Marino will share his experiences as an Afro-Colombian community leader who was displaced multiple times and who has led numerous campaigns over the past decade defending the civil and collective rights of Colombia's Afro-descendant peoples. He'll share his ideas on how best to integrate Afro-Colombians and deepen their participation in Colombia's society. And in sharing his story, Marino hopes to foster a broader understanding of the challenges faced by displaced Afro-Colombians and how to overcome lessons for other Afro-descendant populations in the region. Marino Córdoba is the founding president of the National Association of Displaced Afro-Colombians, Afro-Des, a NED grantee, a Bogota-based organization that advocates for the political, social, and land rights of Afro-Colombians who have been displaced in the armed conflict. From 1992 to 96, he served as president of the Rural Farmers Association of the Lower Atrato River, Okaba, where he championed the land rights of vulnerable communities. And in 1993, he played a central role in the movement that led to the passage of Law 70, which was the country's first legal framework for defending the land rights of Afro-Colombians. After surviving 5 assassination attempts, Marino was forced to flee the country for the United States in 2002, where he founded Afro-Des USA. In 2012, he returned to Colombia and was elected the president of Afro-Des. And during his fellowship here, Marino is examining how best to empower and integrate displaced Colombians in ways that deepen their participation in Colombian politics and democracy. As part of his project, he's documenting his own experience as a human rights leader and providing recommendations for strengthening protections for Afro-descendant peoples, who I understand constitute more than a quarter of this population, 26%, you told me. Ms. Zakiya Carr-Johnson is the director of the Race, as I said, director of the Race, Ethnicity, and Social Inclusion Unit within the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, and she's worked to promote equality in the hemisphere through bilateral agreements, in particular a US-Colombian agreement and an agreement with Brazil on racial and ethnic equality. I'll turn the floor over to Marino in a moment. He'll speak for approximately 25 minutes, followed by Zakia, who will comment on Marino's remarks for 10 minutes. For those of you on Twitter, you can follow this presentation and contribute to the conversation by using the hashtag #NedEvents or by following Forum at Think Democracy and the endowment at Ned Democracy. If you have not already done so, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. And finally, let me take this opportunity to thank staff members involved with this event, and most especially Research Associate Hainer Cibrian, who has offered vital assistance onto the fellowship project for today's presentation. Marino will speak from the podium. He'll have a PowerPoint, so we'll sit in the front while, because there'll be slides on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for your wonderful introduction and for your work. I want to acknowledge the presence of each one of you today here. I just wanted to say that for 5 months in my fellowship time, Ned has offered me a place to think, to work, educate others on the situation of Colombian. And most importantly, it gave me time to re-engage with my family, with my friends, who I had not been in touch with for 2 years since I voluntarily moved to Colombia. Thank you very much to the NET team for your work. And thank you, Zakia, for accepting this invitation today to present on this panel. Today's presentation has 6 parts. The first one, where we stand today. The second, the human cost of the conflict. The third, my struggle as a human rights defender. The Afro-Colombian experience. The work done through Afro-Des USA. And the last part is the to inclusive democracy. Today, Colombia is moving in the right direction toward finding peace. I must acknowledge the leadership of President Juan Manuel Santos in his search for peace. It would be easier to continue the war if he were to listen to the extreme right, which is not interested in peace in Colombia. Today, there are 5 agenda points that the and the FARC are discussing: land reform, political participation, drug trafficking, rights of the victims, and disarmament. 3 of the 5 points had already been agreed to. Right now, the parties are discussing the 4th point, the rights of the victims. In the history of peace processing in Colombia, this is the farthest that the 2 sides had gotten in agreeing on issues. We had experienced 50 years of internal armed conflict. This has translated to 50 years of daily deaths, displacement, disappearances, and other abuses. The statistics On this slide, which come from a 6-year study by the Independent National Center for History, might underrepresent the total cost of the. In the last 50 years, more than 200,000 people had died. 80% of those were more than 11,700 people have been killed in almost 2,000 massacres. Between 1985 and 2012, over 5 million people have been displaced, making Colombia the country with the second largest IDP population in the world after Syria. More than 25,000 have disappeared. But according to the Red Cross, more than 92,000 Colombians have disappeared during the 50 years of war. That is why we need to end this conflict. Before we discuss the atrocities my community and I faced, it is important that we talk about Law 70 of 1993 in our territorial rights. Law 70 of 1993 recognized the right of Afro-Colombians to collectively own and occupy their ancestral lands. It is based on the following principles: recognition and protection of the ethnic and cultural diversity and equal rights for all cultures, respect for the integrity of the Black community's cultural way of life, participation of the Black community and their organizations without detriment to their autonomy and decisions that affect them and those that affect the entire nation. Protection of the environment, emphasizing the relationship established between the Black community and the nature. Law 70 has served as a basic of my work. Law 70 recognized the territorial rights of Afro-Colombians. After it passes, 149 collective titles were issued, which translate to a total of 5.2 million hectares of land, about the size of West Virginia. In my struggle for Afro-Colombian human rights, I have served my community in many different roles. From 1980 to 1990, I served as a local leader. My role was to help our community in Rio Sucio, Chocó, self-develop and advance without the support of the state. I was under threat by the guerrilla, who did not recognize and respect the autonomy of the Indian people. As a labor union art group, exerted control over all facets of life and economy in rural territories. This group saw my work to organize workers to improve our condition in the banana plantation as a threat. An assassination attempt forced me to leave Urabá. As a representative in Chocó, I fought against the exploitation of natural resources by landers lumber companies. I advocate for the territorial land rights for Afro-Colombian found in Law 70. On December 13 of 1996, the government submitted the first land title, allowing the Afro-Colombian community to serve as an owner of their own land. That was my community. 7 days later, on December 20 of 1996, Operation Genesis started. Now I just want to share with you my own experience, summarized in this video.
Marino Córdoba was born and raised in Rio Sucio in the department of Choco, Colombia. At one time, life for the descendants of African slaves in Colombia was a tranquil experience. After gaining freedom from slavery, most of these people lived good lives for generations on the Pacific coast. However, they did not have legal title to their land. In 1993, through the persistent work of community organizers such as Marino Córdoba, a law passed to grant Afro-Colombianos title for legal possession of this land. Sadly, soon after the titles were given, right-wing paramilitary death squads arrived to displace the new landowners through a process of fear and assassination. In the middle of a December night in 1996, the paramilitary arrived in Marino Cordoba's town with a list of names of human rights workers and community organizers. They went on a house-to-house hunt for their victims.
Mi pueblo, Río Sucio, está ubicado a orillas de un río.
My community is located on the banks of a river called the Atrato River in that department of El Chocó. And there's no highway and there's no airport. The only means of communication is the... So to get to the town, you have to use the river. And so on December 20th at 5 a.m., the paramilitaries came to this town. So a lot of speedboats came carrying a lot of heavily armed men. So these men came into our town through the police station. So this is the first building that you come to as you pull up to the town in the boat. And so they got off their boats at the police station, and from there they went out to the streets with their list in hand of people that they were looking for to kill. And the people that figured among those on this list were the community leaders and the leaders of this organization, leaders from the whole municipality, especially those who had been involved in the struggle for the land titles. So since they came so early, most of the people were still asleep, and they went into their homes and they dragged them out of their beds, and some of them were naked still because they'd been sleeping, and they tied their hands behind their back like this and began dragging them through the streets naked. And anyone who resisted was shot right there in front of their family. And as they were dragged through the streets and as others went running through the streets, they were shouting and crying because they had never seen a situation like this before. And their cries and their shouts is what woke up the rest of us. I was still asleep at that time as well, but I was able to wake up when I heard their cries and understand what was going on. So I also began to run out and look for a hiding place. So my town is sort of in the form of an island because it has a waterway on the backside as well. And so many of us ran toward the water, and we hid there. At 8 a.m., Army helicopters arrived to the town and they began to fly over. And these paramilitaries who were on the ground were in radio communication with the soldiers and the helicopters. And they told the people in the helicopters that they should attack those of us who were running toward the river because we were guerrillas. So the army began to attack the people who ran back here with machine guns and by dropping grenades. In this process, the army and the paramilitaries killed many people. Many people they captured and took them alive, and then we never saw them again. And those of us who survived were hidden in the water for 3 days. And after 3 days, we knew we had to get out because we were very desperate and we had. But the town was still full of soldiers and of paramilitaries, but that was still the only way out, so we had to go through there anyway. So we decided to leave very late at night, and just by chance, by luck, the place that we crossed by, there was no one there.
That was what happened in December 20 of 1996 in my town. It's a long history, you know, it's going to be more, we need more time to talk about that. But after Operation Genesis, thousands of Afro-Colombians, including myself, were forced to flee, first to regional urban centers, and then later to Colombia's larger cities. During my displacement, I met with other displaced families in Bogotá on our rise under Law 70, our rise as IDPs, and the necessity to organize in order to take care of our basic needs and resolve our problems. But that time, I had to mention this, that we had the first Afro-Colombian women who became our representative in the Congress. She is right here with us, Zulia Mena, who is mayor of Quito, and she offered me a place to live in Bogotá, and also she brought me to the Congress to work with her. And thanks to her, I was able to go out and meet some Afro-Colombian displaced in the barrios in the city and try to organize them. As a result of these meetings, a group of Afro-Colombian leaders and I founded Afro-Des in 1999. Afro-Des integrates 96 Afro-Colombian IDPs organizations through the country. There are now 90,000 members of this organization. Our mission is to guide, support, accompany, train, and speak in defense of the Afro-Colombians' right in our culture and identity. Afro-Des focus its attention on the international community, regional mechanisms, and the state by documenting and providing recommendations that address the needs and rights of the IDP following Colombian Constitution and the international law. In our field in Bogotá, as an organization, we focus on identifying the causes of Afro-descendant displacement, the condition in which they live, whether or not IDPs own land before becoming displaced, the assistance IDPs have received following their displacement, if any, whether or not IDPs intended to return to the land of origin. Because of this work, threats were made against me again and other Afro-Des leaders. In 2001, when I was walking on the street doing this work, organizing Afro-Colombian display, I got shot and wounded in a leg. Despite a 2000 International American Commission on Human Rights ordered the Colombian government to keep me and my work safe. I was constantly under threat, and the government failed to protect myself. In 2012, Representative John Conyer helped to bring me to the US, where I obtained political asylum. From 2002 to 2012, I focused my work on the US doing educational activities and advocacy for Afro-Colombian rights. I also work as a senior organizer with the SIU trade union, organizing workers in low-income areas in DC, and with day laborers at Casa de Maryland, organizing immigrants. I returned to Colombia in 2012 to support Afro-Des leaders who had been on the threat. And I just wanted to be part of their struggle, not only here, but over there. Now let's take a deeper look at the Afro-Colombian community. According to the National Department of Statistics, 4.2 million Colombian citizens identify as Afro-descendant, which make us about 10.5% of the total population. Unofficial estimates, however, record that there are actually 7.8 through 11.6 million Afro-Colombian. This would suggest that Afro-Colombian actually make up between 18 and 26% of the total population of Colombia. Afro-Colombian are mainly concentrated in the Pacific, Caribbean, and Andean region. In the Pacific region, there are almost 2 million Afro-descendants. In the Caribbean region, there are over 1 million Afro-Colombians. Over 2 million Afro-Colombian cities. That number is now increasing due to displacement. The first study on poverty in 1989 estimated that between 1973 and 1985, the percentage of Afro-Colombian with unsatisfied basic need exceeded 74%. This percentage had increased according to the 2005 census. It has now reached 79.1%. There is a huge inequality between Afro-Colombians' quality of life and the rest of the Colombian population. This shows the long history of exclusion, discrimination, and poverty. Considering this fact, it is easy to note that Afro-descendant and indigenous people are disproportionately affected by displacement of over 6 million in Colombia. More than 30% of the displaced are Afro-Colombian. despite the fact that they make up only 10% of the total population. That means about half of the Afro-Colombian population is displaced today. This displaced person come from areas where have registered land titles, the Pacific region and the Caribbean region. And all 102 indigenous ethnic groups in Colombia are at risk of extinction. Legal rights, the Constitutional Court has issued several orders on the government to act on our displacement. Our T025 of 2004 ordered the state to identify the number and needs of displaced population. Our 92 for female IDPs of 2008 recognized the problem of exploitation and abuses of IDPs women. Our 005 for Afro-Colombian ordered the government to work with the community to help design the integration implementation program. Its main goal is to facilitate the reintegration of Afro-Colombian issues into national level government agendas. Afro-Des advocate for and work to achieve this goal. However, the government implementation of this core order has been limited. While in the US, I helped to create an advocacy network of Afro-Latino, African-American, Afro-Colombian diaspora, human rights and religious organizations and academic that support Afro-Colombian rights. This network succeeded in obtaining political and physical protection for Afro-Colombian leaders and community in times of crisis, engaging the Congressional Black Caucus and other representatives on Afro-Colombian issues, getting President Bush to come to meet with Afro-Colombian when he visited Colombia in 2008. Afro-Colombians such as Zulia Mena, who she was in that meeting with President Bush. Having President Barack Obama meet with the representative of the Afro-Colombian community in Grand Land Title at the Plaza San Basilio de Palenque in Bolívar, raising awareness of Afro-Colombian rights through two US resolutions such as the 2007 Congressional Resolution on Colombia's IDP. It's important to understand that the US and Colombia government has a close relationship through agreements like Plan Colombia, US-Colombia Free Trade Agreement, and the US-Colombia Action Plan on Racial and Ethnic Equality. The Plan Colombia was a US-Colombia bilateral agreement aimed at combating Colombia drug cartels and left-wing guerrillas groups in Colombia. The plan proposed a military strategy to solve the armed conflict without effectively bringing humanitarian assistance to the affected population. This assistance provided to the military made its way to the paramilitary group that committed several atrocities against local population. The US-Colombia Free Trade Agreement 2006 made the tariff and other barriers to trade in goods and services between the two countries during the Obama and Santos administration. The free trade agreement favors multinational whilst devasting the economy in Colombia, farmers and rural Afro-Colombian and indigenous community. The loose scale and infrastructure development projects like the expansion of the ports are often Afro-Colombian, indigenous, and poor population. The free trade agreement also violates Convention 169 of the ILO and Charter 7 of Law 70, which state that projects and program implemented in Colombia that affect Afro-Colombian community should be consulted with them. For the last 10 years, the U.S. has made some important changes to the aid toward to Colombia and try to mitigate the negative effect of the free trade agreement. For example, the U.S. Labor Action Plan, whose goal is to end violence against the trade unionists and impunity in their cases and do away with the third-party contract. Reform military strategy online in Plan Colombia by adding human rights conditions to military aid in order to protect Afro-Colombian land, rights, and leaders, including Afro-Colombian issues in State Department annual human rights report, and shifting the balance of the US aid packet to Colombia so that more funds go to IDPs, justice in Afro-Colombian and indigenous. Action letters and report on Afro-Colombian issues, creation of the IC program for Afro-Colombian and indigenous community that goes from 2010 to 2016. We support hundreds of our youth in training and funding jobs. Imagine those being recruited into the art groups because they lack of opportunity. The U.S. also developed the US-Colombia Action Plan on Racial and Ethnic Equality in 2010. Priorities are for this action plan program include priority area for this action plan include greater access to education and economic opportunity and cultural preservation, increase recognition of their culture, traditional knowledge, and contribution to the societies, and integrating of the history of this community as part of the national education curriculum. US-Colombia Racial Plan led to the creation of the Racial Inclusion Unit in the U.S. Department. Thank you, Zakia, for your leadership in this program. Despite of this awareness concerning to the struggle of the Afro-Colombian community, we are constantly marginalized in the current peace process. There is not a high-level advisor for Afro-Colombian issues in the peace talks right now. Victims delegation has not yet included the organized Afro-Colombian leadership. The government has not approached the Afro-Colombian community in how to address our rights of truth, justice, and reparations. In order for Colombia to become an inclusive post-conflict democracy, it must take a few actions to strengthen Afro-Colombian rights. Colombia must seek truth and justice with reparation, reintegrated individual rights to guarantee the non-repetition of abuses, strengthen our collective territory rights, and reintegrate Afro-Colombian IDPs through social economic rights. The UN regional mechanisms, donors should support the advancement and implementation of such a framework that is put in place in consultation with and concentration with Afro-Colombian community councils and leaders. For Afro-Colombian to be reintegrated in this area requires support and consideration, truth, justice, and reparation. Truth. All actors, legal and illegal, who commit a crime against Afro-Colombian must take responsibility for their action and acceptance their crimes. Justice. Perpetrator of crimes against humanity must be accountable. Reparation. Funds must be provided to victimized communities so they can start over. There must also be training for Afro-Colombian leaders in a force that they can guarantee integrating them into politics and the government. To guarantee no repetition, the government must reinstate our individual rights. They can do so by creating an entity that can analyze Law 70 of 1993, Constitutional Court Order T025, subsequently orders such as Auro 005 and Auro 092, and the Land and Victims Law. And determine what is the best approach to take given what has been and not been completed, and the best way forward toward reinstatement of such rights. Such efforts must be done in consultation with the Afro-Colombian community. Our territory rights must also be strengthened. The government must finalize Law 17 process, strengthening previous consultation mechanisms by creating a fund that Afro-Colombian communities can administrate in order to increase their autonomy and leadership in collective land areas. Finally, the government must also reintegrate Afro-Colombian IDPs by addressing our basic needs, including access to education, strengthening our labor rights, and improving our socio-economic status, developing basic infrastructure in hard-hit areas along the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast, seeking international donor support for training and job creation programs like expansion of AC program for Afro-Colombian and indigenous by the U.S., support Afro-Colombian women head of household in this elderly, introduce cultural and employment program that reduce possibility of youth entry to the life of crime, strengthening and support Afro-Colombian trade unionists. So this is the story of my struggle and the struggle for my community to achieve this greater quality in our country. We have come a long way, but lot to be done. We are grateful to the United States for the support we have received thus far, and we count on your support to help us in our community fulfill our promise in inclusive democracy. Thank you.
Well, that was really comprehensive and an education about this problem, and it's interesting hearing something like that coming out of the experience in this country. We'll talk about that. I mean, the differences and the issues and how you came to your own perspective, which is, has so much in common really with Dr. King, whose picture was there at the end of the presentation. We'll now hear from Zakia, and then we'll open it up.
That's right. There we go. Good afternoon. Marino, first and foremost, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel. I want to thank Carl Gershom and the NED organization for having and hosting this dialogue, which I think we still are not tired of hearing. We have to not be tired of hearing because it's still relevant. And I say still because Marino gave a timeline, and you can see how long this struggle has been going on and how long these issues have been important. I want to acknowledge that the work that Marino has done, the work that former Congresswoman and now Mayor Zulia Mena, who is with us today, the work of a number of people I see here in the audience, I see Carlos Quesada and others, have done to raise the visibility of the issues that impact African descendants and indigenous people in this hemisphere. I think it's one of those countries where people have seen the experience as a reference point. Marino mentioned Ley 70, or the 70s law, or the Law 70. And we are now in the 21st year since the law, and it still remains a reference in the region in terms of the empowerment of people of African descent in the struggle for their collective land rights, the struggle for recognition, and the struggle for against invisibility, marginalization, poverty, and disempowerment. And I think there's so much promise still left in that law, so much more work that has to be done. But I also wanted to acknowledge, and Marino has been very humble in his presentation, our embassy in Bogota, our bureau, the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs, and the United States government is more aware of the needs of African descendants and of Afro-Colombians and indigenous people because of your work, because of the work of organizations like Afro-Des, like PCN, like, I'm forgetting so many, Afro-America 21 and others. There are many, many organizations. And this is not just one man. This is one man who represents a number of people who have these concerns. But our government has been made more aware because of the work that Marino has done, the outreach that was done, and the strategy that existed to really bring people closer to what has happened to Afro-Colombians in Colombia. I wanted to say also that Marino and I actually met doing this work. I worked before I joined the US government in an organization called Global Rights, and we co-chaired the Afro-Colombian Working Group, which came out from the Latin American Working Group, recognizing that we needed to have more focus. This was in 2002. Have a greater focus on issues as they pertain to specific communities. Having a discussion about universal human rights was not enough. And without looking at these specific groups, there would be no way for us to measure the impact of any policies, any foreign assistance, any efforts made for peace, because they're the canary in the miner shaft. What affects Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities really is reflective of what is affecting the country as a whole. And what we found, he mentioned outreach to the Congressional Black Caucus. People automatically said, why didn't we reach out to the Hispanic Caucus? And I think we did. I think there were many efforts. But it's interesting when you talk about what makes sense to countries at different times, the issue of discrimination, the issue of historic legacy and traditions and culture of an African diaspora community resonated with the Congressional Black Caucus. I think their constituencies felt strongly like, we have something in common. What can we do to make this more visible? And that was, I think, how so many efforts were moved forward, including the office where I now work, where the creation of the Race, Ethnicity, and Social Inclusion Unit. I was thinking in Spanish. It's not a secret anymore. It's not an invisible issue anymore. Marino mentioned our human rights reports have specific mention of African descendants, of Afro-Colombians. There is a specific effort made by my colleagues throughout the Western Hemisphere to understand better how to meet the needs. And I think part of that effort I mentioned has to do with the work that Marino carried out in this country and the work that so many others carried out in Colombia. I wanted to quickly say that in response to not just the IDP issue, not just the internally displaced discussion, because that's one part of the discussion, but what people kind of, when I visited Bogota, was the phenomenon. And what they said was the phenomenon was that we've never seen African descendants begging in a street corner. And this is a phenomenon we want to end because we're used to having territory, having land, having a place. And for us to be in Bogota, juggling, washing windows to try to make ends meet seems ridiculous. And I kept saying, well, that happens at home. People do that all the time. But they were like, people were surprised and concerned. And I think beyond just the internally displaced issue is economic opportunity, education, and access to employment, to entrepreneurship opportunities. What happens while you're displaced? How do you survive? While you wait for attention from others, how do you live? How can you support your family? And some of the efforts that have been created between our two countries, Marino mentioned we have a US-Colombia action plan on racial and ethnic equality, and that was signed in 2010. And that bilateral agreement between our two governments announced our commitment to formally work together to promote cooperation, understanding, and the exchange of information to promote equality of opportunity and to eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination. Sometimes we like to dance around the issue. We talk about everything else. Poverty is horrible, and inequality, but we won't say what the inequality is. In this case, we know that a majority of the people living below the poverty line are people of African descent, and it's a historic inequality. It has to do with how we all got to the Western Hemisphere. And it is part of our history, part of the US history as well. And what we share in common is a commitment to combat racial and ethnic inequality and look at ways to empower communities. Actually, today we went on a site visit. There was a delegation from a program that Marino also mentioned, which is the Afro-Colombian and Indigenous program that USAID funds and started in 2011, which runs parallel to the policy discussion between our governments under the CAPRI, or the US-Colombia Action Plan on Racial and Ethnic Equality. And we did a site visit today looking at opportunities for youth in the United States, and could we learn something from that experience? Could we learn something from job training programs, and can they be applied in the Colombian context? Well, right now, some of the programs through that ASIP program are focused on vocational training, job training, and readiness, preparedness, and one other issue, which is really important, because not only do you have the stigma of being an internally displaced person, but perhaps you also have the mark of what people are not used to seeing in major cities. Maybe they're discriminating against you. Maybe they don't understand that is also a value. And one thing that we've learned in this country, and I think we cannot stress enough, one thing I like to remind, and let me know if I go over time, one thing I like to remind myself as we do this work, which is not easy, is that democracy is a process. It goes up, it comes down, and we continue to push forward. We don't reach democracy and say, now we've done it. It is a process, and it is an ongoing process. And I would like to say that racial equality is the same thing. We can't really rest. And so the fact that we've had 50 years of a Civil Rights Act, and we are moving forward in this country on issues of equality, we know that also there are moments when we have gone backwards in the same efforts. And so areas of affirmative action, access to education, criminal justice system, and looking at training of police officers and other things. There are lots of things that we've accomplished and many things that we're still learning lessons about. So we wanted to continue to share those lessons with our neighbors in Colombia and brothers and sisters in Colombia. I could say so much more, but I think your presentation was absolutely full of lots of things that I'm sure we could all discuss. I wanted to give one last update, and I wanted to say that we have a number of programs that we've been working through our embassy to do, so not just the ASIP program, but programs on access to education, looking at it through the lens of a specialized Martin Luther King program. That program provides English learning, English learning and English training and leadership for young people of African descent and indigenous young people as well. Our College Horizons program, which, if you're going to talk about what happens to the generation that only knows Cali, even though their parents are from Chocó. You've moved from Chocó, now you live in Cali. What is your hope for the future? What type of opportunities do you have? And I'm hoping that these sorts of programs can be a complement to other things that are happening within the Colombian government to support the needs of people of African descent and indigenous people. And I won't go into more detail, and I'm happy to answer other questions as they come about. But it is such a pleasure to sit here and see kind of a living history and to look back 21 years and say there's still so much, but look how far we've come. And to know that hopefully we will continue to bring more and more people to an understanding of why this is important, even as a peace process is happening, why this focus is still important. So I'm going to stop my and thank you so much, Marino, for the
Great.
opportunity to discuss.
Thank you. I want to have a first question and then open it up, but I guess my question is stepping back a little bit. I know we want to get into a lot of the practical things, and you had a lot of very practical ideas in your presentation. But what struck me as an American about your presentation, and as an American who, can think back to the period you referred to of Dr. Martin Luther King, and you had at the end of your presentation, you also had a photograph with King of Malcolm X. These were not identical figures. They were actually very different figures, representing two very different approaches to dealing with the American racial problem. One, strongly committed to nonviolence and integration, which were the values that you have espoused in your presentation, but the other was committed to a very different program, a program of racial separatism and, not excluding violence. It was very clear. And it was in the 1960s when our movement reached its peak. There was a very, very sharp debate between these two elements. Does that exist in Colombia? Or do you have elements in the Afro-Colombian who identify more with the Malcolm X approach than with the King approach? Or is what you're saying reflective of the mainstream? I was even, struck by two things in your presentation. One is that when you were talking about the peace process that is underway right now, you said that there is no high-level advisor for Afro-Colombians in the peace. That's remarkable. Their victim delegations are not included They don't include Afro-Colombian leaders, the victim delegations, and the government, this most interesting of all, has not approached the community on how to address our rights to truth, justice, and reparations. That's quite remarkable. And the question is, why is that? And I would imagine that if you do have a situation where after these many years, you're not consulted in the peace process, that would be a source of enormous grievance and protest. Is it? And what are you doing to address that? And one last point. You use the term reparations for what is one of your demands. But the way what you want and what you mean by reparations, you say that you want training of Afro-Colombian leaders with parties. I mean, you want programs basically of support. When that issue came up here in the United States, it was never addressing practical issues. It was addressing historic grievances, as if there was some amount of money that could be paid to the American minority population to make up for the past injustices. You're talking about very practical things. And I guess my point in raising this with you is to try to understand the movement in Colombia and how it may relate to the movement here. You're very practical, you're very nonviolent, you're very integration-oriented. Do you have any of these other tendencies which were so powerful in the United States, and in which, if you don't have them, why is that?
This is first of all, thank you again for your comment, Carol. I'm in Sakia for you support your work. We, as you see, not only because I said that in my presentation, but the statistics are right there. We had 30% of the displaced people in Colombia who are Afro-Colombian. And we have 10% of the total population Afro-Colombian. So we have half of the population of Afro-Colombian being displaced. They are displaced right now. And they are moving from one place to another place. They're moving, for example, Quito, where Zulia is the mayor, 50% of the population in Quito are displaced. They are people who move from Rio Sucio, from other cities or community, and they had to go to Quito. So we have half of our population displaced. We don't have right now in the Havana, Cuba, a representative of the Afro-Colombian who can talk about our issues, about our proposals, how we think and how we have been affected in the middle of this war. We don't have. There is a higher advisor of the Colombia government that she is a Afro-Colombian, is not representing us on that talks. This is what happened right now. So we really want to see the Colombia government sitting with us and having conversation about how the Afro-Colombian community, organized people, can be part of this process and how they can bring proposals to the table. We don't have that yet. We hope they can do. And I must say this again. I acknowledge the leadership of the President Juan Manuel Santos trying to negotiate with the guerrilla, trying to end the unhuman war. And we are, but we don't have people over there. For the other side, in terms of your question related with the, if we have Afro-Colombian who think that we can find a solution to this problem through the conversation, dialogues, and others that think we do have people that they think that we need to do something different. Because the way that we live and the way that we have been treated in Colombia is make us to think different way to respect or trying to make our proposals and ask the armed group and the Colombia government to respect our rights. Just an example, Carol, when in 1996, when the paramilitary town is, and there is an paramilitary testimony over there. They had conversation, they had agreement between the paramilitaries and the militaries in how to come to my town. And they came, they passed by with the militaries point, and they were not stopped. They came to my town. They searched for the leaders in the city, in the town, and the police was right there. And then the military came by helicopter to my town, and they were so paramilitaries and not the population. And that was the Afro-Colombian community. But that happened after 7 days that my town, my people received the first title of the land. And there were companies who were taking care of the natural resources in that area. And they were afraid because people were receiving the title, and that was difficult for the company to continue taking care of the natural resources of the land, because the community now has the control, and they were afraid to lose this. So that kind of situation makes us to think differently. How to approach this kind of situation? We have been peaceful. You know, we had the name of the Pacific region. We are Pacific. We are not violent people. But the way that the Colombia, the government, and also the armed group, all of them have been treating us is not human. But we are not taking care of that. We are not, violence. We think that we need to continue working in the way that we can find a dialogue with the others to find a solution to this problem. And this is why we support the peace process right now. We believe that Colombia needs to end the war by conversation, not by the force.
Let me, before I open up, I just want to follow up one question. Colombia has been such an incredibly violent country. You yourself said over 200,000 people killed in this war. It's remarkable, I find, that your movement has been able to retain this commitment to nonviolence. I want to understand how that is possible and whether there are any tendencies within the movement to say, look, nonviolence doesn't work. If we really threatened more, if we had violence, the government might be talking to us more than they are right now.
Yeah, and this is why we believe that we were opposing to the Free Trade Agreement Plan Colombia at the beginning, because we think that the U.S. need to support the peace, support the poor people in Colombia. We have right now a program, AC program for Afro-Colombian and indigenous. This is amazing, how the young people have been trained and they have been finding job for them to support the family. Imagine those people being recruited by the armed group. We had about 5,000 people right now. They are trained. They have been placed to work. Imagine 5,000 people part of the armed group right now. This is, increasing the war, the violence, the conflict in my country. So in the other ways, I think that will be difficult for us because Colombia follow what the U.S. say. If the U.S. support the peace, the Colombia politicians, they will follow this. If the U.S. support the war, politicians, they are going to continue making war in Colombia.
Okay, it's a fascinating subject. Let's open it up to some discussion from the floor. Do I see anybody who, I see three immediate hands, so 1, 2, and 3. Please, and we'll maybe take them together and then we'll hear from the panel.
Good afternoon. My name is John Clark. I lived for several years in Colombia, and I first wanted to thank Marino Córdoba, Zakia, thank you very much, and Mr. Gershman for the presentation and the like. I wanted to ask to everyone, but specifically to Mr. Córdoba as well, is there a possibility to really obtain inclusive democracy if we don't have inclusive economic opportunities? And what are some of the best lessons that we can apply from the US case in terms of social entrepreneurship, in terms of resources that can be applied to the Colombian case? I lived in Colombia for 2.5 years, and living there, I experienced a wide variety of experiences. On an Avianca flight, for example, every time I would take the flight, people would always know I'm a foreigner. In certain neighborhoods in Bogota or in Cartagena or Barranquilla, you would know you're a foreigner if you're in the wealthy areas. But when you go to the normal areas, no one ever asks you where you're from or the like. You compare that to experiences in France, where there's also a significant middle-class African population and the like. And people will speak to you in French and assume, oh, you could be a local or the like. But in Colombia, despite having a larger Afro-descendant population than the US, no one would ever assume if you're in Rosales or in Altos de Rio Mar de Barranquilla that you are Colombian. But when you're in Aguas Blancas, Cali, or in Buenaventura, no one ever looks at you twice. And sometimes they're like, oh, I seen you before, you're from Buenaventura. It's like, no, I just got here, actually. So I'd like to hear your feedback.
Okay, thanks. And then right behind you.
Buenas tardes. Yo creo que hay que valorar la forma heroica como Marino Córdoba ha sabido asesorar, articular esfuerzos, orientar y guiar para llevar esta organización tan importante Afro-Des. Pero al mismo tiempo me parece que sería valioso que Afro-Des buscara las estrategias necesarias para encontrar un puesto en la mesa de diálogo de La Habana, la de la paz en Colombia.
So
Para
while
que-
it's important to
para
mention that
que-
it's been
Just
very
one second.
historical and important, the work that Afro-Des has done to bring this information out into the world, it's important too that you consider working to get a space at the table in Havana.
Las inquietudes, toda esta problemática, toda esta crisis que han sufrido los desplazados fuera recibida de primera mano allá en esa mesa donde se va a decidir el futuro de Colombia.
So that this whole crisis you presented, all these statistics and the situation of the displaced, is heard at the negotiating table in Havana.
Very good, thank you. And the third question here.
Hi, how are you? My question is that
Could you identify yourself, please?
my name is Lina Velaz and I'm from the Ministry of Labor of Colombia. As far as I understand, there is a woman, an Afro-descendant woman, as a high-level commissioner in the Havana negotiations. Her name is Nigeria Renteria. Do you think she is representative of the Afro-descendant people, and why or why not? Thank you.
So, Marina, would you like to answer first?
Sure. Thank you. Let me start for the last question from Lina. Just like, I said before, Nigeria is a Afro-Colombian person. She had done a job with the Afro-Colombian community, but in representing us in Havana, she is not doing that. She is part of the Colombian government delegation. So she can't speak for our people and for our situation. because she is representing the Colombian government on the table. So in that question, we really need to have our own delegates to go over there to present our proposals over there. And the question from Professor Isaias is a pleasure for me to see you here in the U.S., and he is part of a delegation who came to the U.S. And there's people like Eva, and there is another Afro-Indigenous, and other people right here who is going to be presented tomorrow at the CBC annual conference, and they are today here. But yes, I think that we need to find a way to take our proposals to the Havana, to the peace process negotiation, to the table. But one of the things for us to go over there is with the U.S. support. We can't go because we have been affected by the conflict, and because we need to be there. It's not so easy to do that, in Colombia. Let me mention you just one thing that might sound like ridiculous, or it's not like that, but the U.S. can't do that the way that happened in Colombia. When the national there was an event at the Palacio de Nariño, at the presidential house in Colombia, and they invited most of the human rights organizations to attend the meeting. Everybody was making to go inside of the Palacio de Nariño for the meeting. And I was there making line. When I came to the police point, I didn't show my ID, Colombia ID. I showed my U.S. passport. And they say, "Oh, you are here, welcome. You want us to let the president know that you are here so he can introduce you?" Just like that. And then I said, "No, I'm going just for the meeting, thank you." And I went. No other police or security stopped me or searched me for something. I went straight to the meeting.
Nice throw or respected somewhere.
The other people who show the Colombia ID, they have several points they had to go through, and I went through one. So this is what happened in Colombia. We don't have the U.S. support forward with our proposals. We can't do it.
Could I turn the floor over to the issue of non-representation, of non-consultation with the Afro-Colombian organizations in the peace process is obviously a very important issue. Does the U.S. have a position on that?
I won't answer that particular question, Carl. But I will say that it's always important for any vibrant democracy to include civil society. Civil society is essential. And I actually wanted to answer John Clark's question, and I'll do that while I'm saying.
Please do.
Civil society and people who are outside of the government are important to all processes of greater understanding. There is no way to sustain the government's attention on any issue without including civil society, people who work outside and within the government. So civil society makes us work, and we work for civil society. So it's a great symbiotic relationship, no? And I wanted to respond to John Clark's question about the possibility, is it possible to obtain democracy or an inclusive democracy without access to economic opportunity? And what can we learn from a U.S. experience? And I think this is where I get so excited. I get jazzed up about the possibilities of learning from some of the policies that did work in the U.S. I'm specifically thinking about the fact that within our U.S. Department of Commerce, we have a minority business development. There is an agency focused on empowering minority businesses, not small businesses, not micro-sized businesses, businesses of all sizes that are owned by minorities and women. And what's fantastic about that is it doesn't keep you from being a billionaire, a millionaire, or a hundredaire. And they provide capacity building. They provide access to credit. They look at ways to support businesses, and they've been doing this for 40 years. Part of this bilateral discussion that we've had on racial equality has brought our colleagues from usually domestic-oriented agencies to the table to talk about our experiences. MBDA has been one of them. I also think about the exchange of civil society associations. So looking at, for example, the National Black Chambers of Commerce here in the US. It's just one example. I'm not trying to endorse any particular group, but there are associations of Black professionals in the United States and of other groups as well that want and have looked for partnerships with Afro-Colombians, Afro-Belizeans, with all sorts of people in the region based on purely an identity response, I guess. Last, I wanted to point out that during our US-Colombia Action Plan plenary, we had with the US government and Colombian government, civil society, and private sector. We had a meeting last June, and in that meeting, we identified economic opportunity points. Some things are about exchanges. Other things are as easy as sharing policies that already exist, for example, in the United States. Some of us who work in foreign policy more often than domestic policy learned that we have a policy called 8A, which looks at creating incentives at the state and federal level for minority-owned businesses to get access to contracts within the government. So if you're looking at the supply chain and you're looking at access to money in terms of huge government initiatives, that's how most minority-owned businesses have been able to get empowered, is that there's access to those streams of money, and that their capacity has been built to be able to access those streams of money. So we've been working on trying to find ways to exchange that information, and I appreciate the question, and there's just so much more, John.
Let's see if we can, it's getting close to 4:30, but I'd like to have another round of questions and answers before we break. So I see 1, 2, is there anybody else? And 3 in the back. So let's do 1, 2, and then in the back.
Thank you so much. I want to congratulate Mr. Cordoba for an amazing job that he's doing on behalf of people who have been suffering so much in Colombia, as well as Mr. Gershman for the work that he's doing in regards to democracy around the world, to Mrs. Johnson as well for the he's doing in sharing the experience from the U.S. with the world to have a better world. I am a dual citizen from Colombia and Canada, and I have been working doing capacity building mostly from the mental skills perspective to help people to improve their living as well as to perform at the best. And what I want to ask Mr. Cordoba is if he has been thinking or considering to include more aspects from the psychological world, from the psychologists, in order to help to improve the communication, which is something that is extremely important in order for move forward in the post-conflict era. And that's something that will allow the parts to build a better country, as well as will help to see the opportunities that are out there, because these people is mostly interested in still fighting those scars from the past. They won't be able to see all the bright opportunities that lie ahead in the future. Correct?
Thanks very much. And then there was here.
Hey, Marino, thank you very much for your presentation, and Zakia as well. I'm Molly McCoy from the Solidarity Center, and I wanted to return to the point about economic opportunity, both Zakia's response and then linking it to one of your slides, Marino. I think we see a lot of really good attention to entrepreneurs and small business promotion, as well as, at the CEO level. But Marino, I saw in your slide mention of the sugar sector, the ports sector, the bananas, I think is another major employer of Afro-Colombian workers, who are never going to be entrepreneurs. They're people who have bosses and very few labor rights. So I would like you to, entrepreneurs, and many of whom who are stuck in pretty exploitative situations, what progress are you seeing and what solutions do you see for the current situation?
Thanks. In the back, then the last question.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask.
Can you identify yourself?
Oh,
please?
yes. My name is Elisa Alexander, and as of tomorrow, I'll be working here. I've noticed in the U.S. experience of racial relations and poverty, healthcare, all of this, one of the recurring factors is media coverage and the ways in which these issues are not presented and left completely out of the narrative. So I was wondering if you could speak to the way that that has manifested maybe in Colombia. What does other groups, what does the entire phenomenon of displacement look like in the Colombian media? Thank you.
Well, three good questions on communications, on labor rights, and media. So, Marino?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Starting for the last one. It's difficult for us to send our message out through the media in Colombia because you know what happened. We don't get much attention on the media when we had issues going on. And sometimes the media they just try to make other point that is more important for them than for their own citizen. Again, when my town was burned down, Rio Sucio, in 1996, you know, the media was talking about a confrontation by the paramilitaries and the guerrilla at that time. And we tried to let them know what happened, you know, to send the right message out, but that was impossible. So it's difficult for us, the media. One of the things that we have been doing right now, or the U.S. through the USAID support to the Afro-Colombian and Indigenous program, this program has a media part that is trying to engage the media to support or to make more visible the Afro-Colombian situation. And I think that this is being working so far. So this is the way that the media is engaging more the Afro-Colombian issue right now. The other question about Molly, about the sugar and banana workers and pressure. That was the small business, isn't it? The question was on that.
She was asking about the issue of labor rights, and isn't that also important in addition to supporting entrepreneurs?
Okay. So, yeah, for us, as you know, most of the workers on the sugar plantation and bananas, they are Afro-Colombian. Especially if you go to Buenaventura, you go to Turbo, working, the workers, they are more Afro-Colombian who have been doing that kind of work. One of the very difficult issue for the workers right now, and that happened in the Uribe administration, was the not being contracted directly by the company. They were using a third party to contract them and then to do the work, but they had no benefit. They had no, directly relationship with the company. So that makes us difficult, and also for the worker very difficult. In that way, they can move forward because they were who was taking the job out from them was the third party, and the worker was doing the work, but they don't have benefits. They don't have good salary, and that I think that was one of the issues that we opposed the free trade agreement, because we were asking to start that kind of situation on the contractors. For the last part of your question about the psychology support, I just wanted to mention, because this is very important for us, and sometimes I believe if I needed that. I think that sometimes what happened in my life is not true. It's not, that happened, never happened to me. Sometimes I think about that. Is that right? That happened to me? I don't know. I think that, we need to find ways that, they get that kind of support or treatment, because what we have been living in Colombia is not, it seems like it's not real. Sometimes, for me, it's difficult to understand what happened. And when I go back to my town and see what happened over there, you see paramilitary, military coming together, that was supposed to protect you, but they were not able to do that. So it's like, I can't imagine that. I'm saying that right, or am I wrong, or what happened? So I think that that's important for us to find ways to treat us in a way that we can recover and we can be more useful to our society. Not only for us, because but for our kids, for young people who they really need to focus in other way that make the life better, but also to serve in a better way to the country.
Would you like to?
Just actually, on the last point, this is not particularly a support for the trauma that someone may have faced being an IDP, but we have a couple of programs that I think have been interesting, using sports as a way to, I think with Mercy Corps and Codeport, we have a program that is looking at youth and peace through sports, and learning to come up with ways to look at violence prevention and alternatives to violence through sports. Sometimes we think of sports as just a game, but for young people in particular, and especially young people who don't have a lot of resources, sports can be such a good way to express your anger, build leadership, come together and build teams and develop that self-esteem that's needed to become the leader that you want to see them be in the future. And I think we haven't done enough of those types of programs. I hope that we will continue to do that type of engagement. But there's so many needs, so many things I think that we could all be doing more of.
Probably baseball and basketball more than football.
Well, Carl. Maybe soccer. Soccer's a good start.
Right, that's what I meant.
And baseball would be a great second. We love baseball. Yeah,
Okay, well, listen, thank you, Zakia, and especially thank you to Marino. I just want to say a couple of words in conclusion. Molly's question about labor rights reminds me that our board members, Fred Redmond from the Steelworkers and Jim Boland from the Bricklayers, have been terrific supporters of what you're doing, and among the strongest advocates for what you're doing. And, I just want you to know, the first time I met you, Marino, when you came in, I think you were even wearing a T-shirt with Dr. Martin Luther King, a quote from him on it. You really do stand in that tradition. I mean, it's a wonderful tradition, and I think that's why when Americans meet you, they get so excited, because what you stand for is something, very, very important to us as a people. Not only integration, nonviolence, reconciliation, all those things. And the fact that you're doing it in a country like Colombia, which, as I've said, has experienced such terrible trauma over the last half a century, I think is just extremely important. And we're very proud to have you at the net. I want you to know that. Thank you.
Thank you.